Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Growing Up Conscious. I'm Kathleen Connor, and I have a special guest on today who I'm excited to talk to. The Growing Up Conscious shows, my personal target is to empower youth to have consciousness tools, mindfulness tools to joy, thrive in any way they can. But the show in particular is for any age group from 2 to 102, for anyone who really is searching to have conscious choice, have a joyful life, and to have ease, joy, fun while they're expanding and being uncomfortable and trying new things and all of that. And part of that also is people in their business, like having a joyful business. So with my guest today, I met Macy at a group that I participate with here in Florida called Professional Women of Flagler County. And, there's some people in the group that are promoting a business that is, like they work for a business. And then there's lots of people that have started their own business. And that's always interesting to me in terms of people knowing that they have the conscious choice to do that and seeing what works and what doesn't work when you do that, and also what empowered you to even make that choice. So my guest, Maci Bacy, did I say it right? Maci Bacy? Yes. Just want to make sure. She is has created a podcast that's local to here called I Love Flagler, right? Something like,
Yes,
what's the name of your
why I
podcast?
love
Yes.
Flagler County. Yep.
Why I Love Flagler. And so it was especially fun to record with her. Part of the reasons why I love living here and what I love about this area. But now that she's come to speak on my show, I want to know what got her to this point. So my first question, Macy, is what would you like to share about your background in growing up or anything that's related to what got you to this point?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kathleen, for giving me a few minutes on your podcast. I really appreciate it. And I absolutely love what you're talking about because I've just grown up with so many people who kind of talk about how they don't really know what they want to do. They just kind of want to follow along the path, what makes sense, either what their friends say, what their parents say. So I absolutely love your topic of choosing your own life and choosing the different things that sometimes other people don't really have an influence on. So a little bit about me. My name's Macy. I'm 20 years old, and my entire life, pretty much, I've been homeschooled. So since elementary school to high school. And there were different things that I used to do in my youth. So I used to be a figure skater. I was a figure skater for about 14 years. Along with, there were just so many different groups I belonged to for other homeschoolers and people I had. So that's a huge question people always ask me when I say I was homeschooled, is I definitely had friends growing up. So that was a huge part. But another part is that the reason I was homeschooled and the reason I was allowed to be homeschooled was my dad had always been in business for himself since I was a kid. So he originally was born in India, came over to the States when he was about, I think, 25. He was in IT for a few years, but then he realized about 10 years into his IT career that, he was really good at IT, computer support, engineering, but he didn't like it. He didn't find joy in being at a computer and staring at it all day, doing all these things. He was a very big extrovert. So he was like, I'm leaving. So he became a business coach, a speaker, and he's now published, I think, over 10 books or exactly 10 books, something like that. And so growing up, I had him always in business and having a very flexible calendar. So he would always show up to all my dance recitals, my ice skating recitals, anytime there was any type of performance where parents weren't allowed, he would always be there. I never had to think twice. I'd be like, oh, yeah, here's the date, just come. He would come. So growing up, that was really positive because I saw some of my friends, and it was of no fault of their own or their parents' own, but sometimes their parents just couldn't come to different recitals. They were out of town, they had work, things like that. And it wasn't something that occurred to me as a privilege for my family because I was so young, I didn't understand. But growing up, I started to see that this was more of a choice that he had made. This was something else, and then this was a choice open to me, right? A lot of my friends when I was getting to high school was talking about college and just different jobs they wanted. And none of it really spoke to me. Also, from ages 11 to 16, I worked in my family's Chinese restaurant up in Michigan where I used to live. And so I did know firsthand what it was like to have a job. And I was like, oh, I don't know. The restaurant business is really tricky. I don't know if I could do this for the rest of my life. Especially because it was family owned. I got to see my aunt run it, my uncles run it, and it's a lot of labor. Anyone I think most people know by now that running a restaurant's a lot of work, but I feel like unless you've seen it up close and personal, like their family, friends, things like that, you just kind of know it's a lot of work. So my dad didn't have to do as much as my aunt did when it came to both of them had their own businesses, but they both had to run it very differently. So when I was about 17, I decided that, I really was not going to go to college. I was not going to just pick a random job. I was just going to go into some type of business for myself. So my dad was like, all right, I'll totally support you, of course. So he gave me this idea to get my name out there to start a podcast. So when I was 17, I started a podcast called What Would You Say to Your Younger Self? Um, and I had about 200 guests throughout the run of that podcast, which was about a year and a half-ish of me running it. And it was just a way for me to work on my networking skills, on my conversational skills, and things like that. So it was a super big point for me, and it was really a really big learning curve. And I had a lot of fun doing it because I do like talking to people. I am like some level of an extrovert. I think I used to be more of an extrovert as a kid, but at the core, I'm definitely still an extrovert. So that's just a little bit on me getting started in my background. So now I'm 20. I have my own podcast now for Flagler County, which is the county we live in Florida, because I thought it was a great networking opportunity when I was a kid. When I was 17, it was really helpful. Then I was like, okay, I don't know the community that well. I feel like this is a great way for a win-win of me just to get my name out there and then other businesses to get their name out there as well. So hopefully that answered your question a little bit and that wasn't too long-winded.
No such thing in regards to talking about things that make sense to share with other people, which all of that did. And so obviously from your dad's support, you knew it was possible. But when it comes to like one thing I learned with the access consciousness tools, and so other than before I studied access consciousness, I studied, like body stuff, like the body talk system, yoga calm for children. So I learned a lot about like consciousness about your body. But what I learned in access is this question of like, who does this belong to? So even when I look at me like teaching, being a special ed teacher for more than 25 years, I think that was to some degree more initially my mom's idea than mine.
Sure.
I do love working with kids still to this day. So, it wasn't necessarily a bad idea, but that whole idea of who does this belong to when you're choosing not just your job, but what you're going to do every day and what your day is going to look like. So how do you separate out, what you actually would like to choose versus what somebody else might tell you to do?
In general or in this specifically?
Either way, actually, I'm making sure yeah, there we go. Sorry.
Yep.
Didn't
No
want
worries.
anything making noise.
Yeah, it can sometimes throw you completely off guard when like your phone rings. Um, yeah, I think, well, for business, definitely my dad had a huge influence on what I would choose. And I completely recognize that. And I think that's a really big part of your consciousness is that if it comes from someone else, that's completely fine. You just have to realize that. If you kind of just wander through life not understanding where things come from, it's really hard for you if and something becomes a problem if you don't know the root of it. I'm not saying that any of this has been a problem. Um, I would say for maybe business specifically and choosing to go into business on my own, I've definitely spent the last few years, since I was 17, cultivating what I wanted to do. And I'm really grateful for my dad for him being open-minded and being like, all right, well, this is what I've done in business. You don't have to do that, right?
Yeah.
There's just a huge world out there of different services you can provide and different things you like to do. So me and my dad have spent a lot of time and energy looking for what really spoke to me when it came to the specifics of it. But I've learned so much through that as well, where I was actively, I was working for him a lot too, and I still do a lot for him. But learning these things that I could do with him and then what I like, right? So he likes different color schemes than I do. I like different fonts that he does. I like different graphics than he does. So as I've grown into my own, it's been definitely really fun and interesting to have these conversations now with my dad when he wants me to do something for him. And he's like, I like it like this way. And I'm like, no, I'm telling you, it looks better this way. He's like, well, I want it this way. And I'm like, okay, well, it's your site, so I have to let you do it, right? But then it helps me take that intake and be like, all right, well, this is what he does. I like this and I like that, but I don't like this and I like that. So it's helped me form that of my own business, just visually what I like, sonically how I like to sound, things like that. So I would say that's really where the difference has lied, is the
Yeah.
understanding that I understand
Well,
the base, but yeah.
I do think mapping, like I think I learned from a woman named Anelia Benz, because I'm in a group called Walk With Me Now. That's a
Mhm.
community where they talk about, you can find other people that have already mastered certain things and map to them. So you're mapping to some of your dad's skills, but then you're creating it your own way, it sounds like.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so if
for
it's
sure.
outside of business, how do you not just get caught up with what your peers or what's popular, that kind of thing, and really choose for you?
That's such a huge question, especially for my age range, I think. But
Yeah.
it's a great question. When it comes to peer pressure and kind of the pitfalls of social media can be just you're so easily influenced by other people and other things. That was a huge thing for me when I was like a preteen. So like in middle school, I noticed that I would compare myself to so many other people so often. It was really damaging, when you're such a young person, you don't know who you are, you don't know your identity, you don't know what you identify with. So to see other people who look like they're fully formed, even if they're not, was really hard because I'm like, well, I don't know what I look like to other people. I don't understand this. Um, so I really had to like have this really hard conversation with myself when I was like 13, where I was like, you have to stop because you can't find your own if you're staring at other people. Um, and that was a really like pivotal moment for me as a kid because otherwise I knew that if I let this linger and I didn't ever address it, I would grow up older and older, which and just find myself into habits that I didn't like, wearing things I didn't really like, doing things I really didn't like. So I actively chose a lot of things to try and choose. Like when I was a kid, I thought I was rebelling by like not wearing pink as much. So there's like a few years where I didn't wear pink. But now that I'm older and I'm like more set in who I am, I will choose these things. Like I love the color pink. Like I feel like there's a bunch of oh sorry. I like a bunch of pink in like my what's it called? Bookshelf on my walls, things like that. Because I was like, all right, well, I know this is more coming from me just genuinely liking the aesthetic of pink and not me following some person who liked the color pink.
Yeah.
So as I've gotten older, I've been able to divide those parts in my brain of being like, oh, I see that really cute skirt on social media. And I think like, okay, is that actually something I would wear? Or does it look really cute on her? And it's really cute with her style and it makes no sense to mine. So I think just having those hard conversations with yourself and kind of
Yeah.
looking in the mirror and being like, all right, what is it in the end that I want? What do I want to look like? What do I want to do? What is the message I want to talk to about other people, and do the things that I'm doing, are they lining up or are they just misconstrued,
Yeah.
decombobulated things just
Yeah.
that float that other people do that I think I should do as well.
Yes. No, I get that, especially with me looking at, like Macy is one of the people that I'm working with for how to get my uh, show or podcast or whatever you want to call it going. There's different names for these things. And so there's certain things she's learned that I'm now learning from her and from other people. And so when I learn from somebody else, same kind of thing, I look at, this is what I'll use, this is what I won't use, and also what works for me, what doesn't work for me, because everybody has an opinion on things like that. And because I'm so curious about people and their relationship with their body, and you said you had a background in skating, you also said something else other than skating? What was it
I
that?
used to do dance.
Yes, right. Do you have anything that you'd like to add about like your conscious connection to your body and listening to your body so that you're honoring it? Because that's something that I feel is really important.
Yeah, that's super important. Again, back to the social media thing, there's just so much floating around of like what I feel like the ideal body type for a woman is meant to be and how you're supposed to look like at every stage and every minute during the day. And it's just so exhausting. Um, but I was a very active kid in that sense where I had a lot of figure skating training and I had a lot of dance training and I had a lot of this and that. And I think it was helpful for just me to be in spaces where I was doing something actively, like with my body, to not get caught up in my mind and not get caught up in all those thinkings. And it's really easy to do, like to fall back into those like bad habits, I think, because I still like deal with them to this day. Um, but I really found that being active is really helpful. It's one of those things where I kind of resisted for a few years, especially during the pandemic, where I was like, yeah, I'm fine. Being locked in my house all day is totally fine. I don't need to do anything. But then I'd go out and I'd feel so much better. I'm like, all right, I've been resisting, but I think this is right. This makes sense. Um, so me and my dad, we like to go to the beach, to Flagler Beach, our local beach, as often as possible, just walking around, just biking around, doing things like that, getting yourself physically out of your mindset, out of your pattern. Like for me, I work from home, so I'm on a computer most of the day. So going outside at least once a day is usually good for me, whether I go to a networking event or I go just to meet with my friends or to go somewhere to physically leave my space and go somewhere else has really helped me in just being conscious of my own thoughts and getting out of that like pitfalls that you fall under when you like overthink too much and worry too much and things like that.
Yeah. I'm also curious if were you in competitive skating too?
Hmm.
So did you ever get to the point where you had a problem with overriding your body, like pushing yourself too hard or not?
I want to say no, because for the most part, I don't like because I can get really competitive and I know that about myself, so I don't like to push myself to places that I know are hard for me. Um, so I've had to learn a lot of balance of pushing myself just a good amount, like pushing myself to not be comfortable, but not pushing myself to the point where I'm very uncomfortable.
Yes.
So I think for the most part, I think I was good, but I was pretty young for a lot of it. So I don't know if I can remember that
Yeah.
well. Maybe my parents will listen to this and be like, no, you definitely did this. And then I'm like, well, I don't remember. So it doesn't count.
It's probably, I tend to be that way too. Like my siblings will remember these things from our childhood. I'm like, how do you remember that stuff? Yeah, I guess when I was training in, I think it was the body talk system, they talked about how some marathon runners end up being unhealthy because they override their body so
Yeah.
often. So it's that balance between like pushing your body when it can handle it and it's fine, and overriding it. So I didn't know if you had experienced that. So that's cool to get your perspective on that, because I think staying balanced with that is great. But probably the majority of people, like you said, err on the other side where they don't get out and move. um, when you talk about studies where being barefoot on the ground brings down inflammation and all sorts of things, people tend to poo-poo them or just like, well, that's nice, but they don't. I mean, now that I have, since I've moved to Florida and I have a more flexible schedule, like you were talking about with your dad, when the lockdowns were announced, I was doing 3 jobs, and I was pretty busy in Oregon because I lived in Oregon at the time. And so even though I knew the things that supported my body, I was so busy that I didn't do them. So same kind of thing that you're talking about, but that aspect of knowing what balances you. So for me, being able to walk on the beach now that I live here, being able to horseback ride, being able to bike ride, hop in my kayak, it really helps balance me. So I agree in regards to that. And then in terms of, I I've been working on some TED Talk material, and I've looked more deeply into how often, like, young kids to young adults are now being diagnosed with anxiety, depression. It could be it could be showing up in other ways like OCD, any number of things. So what would you tell the audience about how you balance out to the typical things that come up as mental health issues for so many young people?
I think kind of referring back to the last thing I was talking about physically moving was super helpful for me. Just because I lived in Michigan at the time of the pandemic, and I was in Michigan for most of the pandemic, but towards the end of 2020, it's dark and dreary and snowy and cold in Michigan, and this was about like maybe end of November, somewhere around December. My dad was like, "I'm don't want to be here. I don't think any of us want to be here." So we went to Florida for a few months, and we were in Port Orange for a while, which was a great experience. And I think being outside in the sun for a lot of the times was super helpful. And if you're not able to maybe physically be under the sun, things like that, or not be in Florida, which is a really some people just don't live here, which is fine.
Some
If
people
you're
don't live here.
unable,
Oh my God.
yeah, it's a crazy thing. I just realized, like, yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of people who might listen to this who might not be from Florida or might not be in somewhere that's super warm or sunny. I think just for me, breaking habits and breaking pattern interruption is something I've definitely learned has helped me, because otherwise I get into like deep pits of anxiety and like despair and worry and just negative thoughts that do no one any good. So whether that is, watching something I wouldn't normally watch, or listening to something I wouldn't normally listen to, or maybe read a different type of book that, I'm feeling more inclined to, or something just more lighthearted. Just some type of like, all right, I'm going down this path. I need to do something to switch this.
Yeah.
Something that is not, hopefully not something too depressing. I feel like sometimes that gets me into something worse. Like I wouldn't put on a sad song if I'm feeling kind of sad. If I want to get out of it, of course. That's a huge
Yeah.
part. But having a huge pattern interrupt to stop your brain and make your brain a little bit confused. I'm like, oh wait, we're not doing this anymore. And you're trying to tell your brain like, we're not. We're doing something different. We're gonna do something fun and happy, and maybe going out with friends, or I've really taken to cooking and baking. I absolutely love those, right? And just the physical act of doing something in my kitchen, moving around, measuring the ingredients, reading the recipe. I don't have time to think about these things, right? I have to make sure there's enough grams of flour for the brownies. I don't have time to think about my anxieties.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's been a huge part.
Yeah. So that aspect of knowing, like, one thing that I sense that adults could do to support in regards to shifting and changing um, a younger population having mental health issues is giving them more time to find out what they actually really enjoy and love doing, so that they can do that pattern interrupt, like,
Mhm.
for when I moved to Florida, I hadn't been riding horses, and once I got back to riding horses, I'm like, oh, I'm going to take lessons. I'm going to get back into that, and that's something that just brings me so much joy when I go. I mean, and I have
Mhm.
to be so present, like the things that make you be present, like you were talking about, like whether it's cooking or where you have to pay attention. When you're on a horse, you really have to, put your attention there. If you don't, because I've fallen off more than once, and you don't. I don't prefer that. Or as my teacher, my horse riding teacher Cheryl says, that was an unscheduled dismount. That the things that require you to be present and engaged just naturally take you off of some of the monkey mind or the crazy stuff that goes through your head, right? um I'm trying to think of some examples I have that are beyond just movement and horseback riding. I think because I live on the river and I live close to the ocean too, sometimes just taking, even if I don't have time to exercise, just looking at the water for a while as well and relaxing into that.
Yeah.
So if you were going to pass on your perspective in terms of people starting their own business, like first choosing what would be joyful for them, or what would be, doesn't even, it might not even be that joyful initially, it might be uncomfortable, but like what are some tips you have for people that would like to go off on their own and choose their own business?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it definitely helps to have an idea of what you'd like to do. But even if you don't, I think the first thing is to always get out there, just get your name out there, right? So going to networking events, going to networking groups, and just meeting people. There are going to be so many things that you'll learn through these things. And there are going to be people who've been in business for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And then there's going to be people who just started last month. And then there's going to be people in between. And there's so much you can learn and so many ideas you can get. So if you think, oh, I'm too new in my business, I don't even know what my idea is going to be, I shouldn't go out and meet people. It's like, no, you want to meet people, you want to form these connections and relationships. Um, so when you're finally ready to launch, you already have all of these people you can contact and talk to, or who can help you, or things like that. If you're not good at graphic design, right? You go out there, you're networking, you meet a graphic designer and you like their work. That's like a task taken off, right? And these types of things are super, super helpful. So I'd say the number one step is to always go out and network. And then number two, always find a good coach. So you definitely need someone to help guide you and help you connect with people and help you learn through things. Because, you can learn through your mistakes, which is a huge learning thing, but you don't want to learn everything through your mistakes. You don't want to burn a bunch of bridges and be like, oh, that's what I was doing wrong, when someone probably could have saved you 3 burned bridges ago, right? Um, but what's important is finding a coach that works for you. So don't feel obligated that you have to pick the first coach you see. I think someone who communicates well with you, who builds the rapport with you, who builds that connection is super important. So I think those are the two number one steps. I don't want to like overwhelm people with steps. I think those are really great starting points though.
Yeah. Well, is there an area that I haven't asked you about that you think would be a contribution to share more about?
I don't know. I don't think so. I feel like we covered a lot of it, covered about the social media aspect, the marketing aspect, the business aspect, my backstory. I don't know if there's trying to think. I think you did a great job, Kathleen. I think you covered all the bases.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's I think that I just want to emphasize too that that aspect of homeschooling versus a more maybe typical education might have set you up also not to have the, like my younger son dealt with anxiety in high school. But high school can, luckily it wasn't for me, but it was a very different time back then, right? In the 70s in high school for me.
Right.
That not being in the environment where there's a lot of crazy judgment about, like it's one thing to stay away from social media or to notice, where you're getting caught in a trap and everything. So that aspect of, not that homeschooling doesn't have its own way that could happen, but I wonder if you have one more kind of point of view about like the benefits of being able to not be in a traditional education system.
Yeah, I think I mean, there are a few differences with homeschooling versus traditional. And don't get me wrong, a lot of like homeschooling is really, I think, up to what the kid's learning style is. And hopefully the parent or the material they provide is helpful for the kid. Sometimes people don't have a great experience, sometimes they do. Just like homeschooling, it's not a one size fit, or just like public schooling, it's not a one size fit all. Because I definitely still have like generalized anxiety. I've had that since I was a kid, and that's just like me, right? That's just part of me. It wasn't something that happened because of anything. But I think the difference is definitely for me, it was personalizing my curriculum. So when I was a kid, I loved to read, so I requested a lot more English than maybe someone who didn't like to read as much. Like my brother
Yeah.
doesn't like to read as much, so he doesn't like to do as much English.
Yeah.
um, but I didn't like math a lot, but I did still have to do math.
Yeah.
But my mom and my dad, they let me read whatever I really wanted to read, anything that was like, of course, appropriate for my age. And I learned a lot. Like a lot of my vocabulary came from these different books that I was reading. And if there was a word I didn't know, they helped me understand, and there are different programs that they had. And so I did so much English and I learned so much English because that was a very interesting topic for me, that in history. So my
Yeah.
parents gave me all the materials I needed because I knew I enjoyed those so much. So they were like, of course, if you want to learn this, we'll help you learn. And so I think that was definitely helpful for me as a kid. And I didn't realize any of this was like I was ahead, quote unquote, when it came to these things, because I just thought everyone liked to read as much as I did. And I was wrong, which is okay. But yeah, so I think the personalization of going at your own speed, and I always had someone that I could ask questions for. So I
Yeah.
was not good at math as a kid. So my parents would sit down and do like every math problem with me because that's just what I needed at the time. And thankfully, as I got older, I was able to figure out a lot of it on my own. But it's because they were able to give me that personalized one-on-one. And my mom actually, she went to school and she was an elementary school teacher. So she was a fifth grade teacher for a little bit. So thankfully, my mom has that built in, and my dad just loves to teach. He loves to talk. So it was a good balance of that growing up. So that was a huge, I think a lot of people know that about homeschooling, but that was my personal experience with having it at my own pace.
Nice. Nice. Yeah. It's a good reminder that sometimes we don't know our own strengths because they seem so natural to us. It's only
Yeah.
when other people, or sometimes like our strength, we make it like a wrongness because other people might judge it. And
Hmm.
then once we realize that actually a strongness, and we can use that to our advantage, it's really helpful.
Hmm.
So yeah, so thanks so much. I know you'll share your link with me so that other people that are local, if they want to podcast with you about being in, is it just Flagler County or is it more like a little bit beyond that? I'm
The focus is kind of Flagler County, but
yeah.
if they don't live here, but they like network in Flagler County, or they have businesses, or they can do business in Flagler County, I'd be definitely open to talking to them as well.
Okay, great, great. Okay, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you sharing your expertise and your story with us today. And I look forward to connecting with you soon.
Bye.
Bye for now.